Before we go into detail on the character and the paragraph panels, let's get some text to work with, which will allow me to explain an important difference. And that is the difference between pasting text into Illustrator and placing it. So as an example, I just went to Wikipedia and copied, let's just copy a paragraph in here. And notice there is what we call local formatting going on. The word typography is in bold, and there's all these links that are in here and so on. What I'm about to show you would also apply to italicized words. So I'm just going to go Command C on the keyboard, copy this, going to go into Illustrator, and then I am going to draw. Now I could just do point text with this, but I'll get a very, very long line of text. So instead I will get rid of that point that I made and just delete that, and then I'll take the text tool and I'll drag text area for that to go. Then on the keyboard, Command V to paste, but notice the word typography is no longer bold, and all those words that were underlined are no longer underlined, they're no longer links. I'm going to delete that. Now there's another way. I can take this, collect all this text, and then copy it, paste it into a Word document. A Word document will keep all of the local formatting, and then we could place this document. But before we place it, let me also show you have the same problem if you just simply copy and paste from Word. So Command C on the keyboard, go back to Illustrator, I'm going to paste this. You'll see that the result was no different than what I did going right from the web. So this time what I'm going to do is I'm going to save this, and I've saved it out. The Illustrator or the Word document is temp text dot dot. Now here's how you place text into Illustrator. File, place, and then you go find that document. So I put mine on my desktop. Just click on it, click place, and then you have a choice of whether you want these items. And if you're working with a writer, they may very well have these items, and you'll have to do a little bit of advanced work to figure out whether you need them or not. And that will most likely be in InDesign that you would do things of that detail. So I'm just going to uncheck all of these. Make sure that this does not get checked, because that would remove the formatting. Then I click OK. It may take a few seconds for this to come in, but what you'll see is it does have that local formatting that's on there. So this is very important when you're working with a client that has some specific content that they want you to use, and they have gone through the trouble of bolding and italicizing appropriate words. It allows you to keep all of that. Now let's go through these panels. So we'll start with the character panel. I'll click on the point text that I made earlier, and the beauty of this panel is most of the things, if you hover the mouse over the top of them, they tell you what they are, so it helps you to remember. Very first thing we have up here is what typeface we're working with, and notice that you get a preview of the typeface here, which you do not if you use the other option. Let me just show you that here. So if I select this type and I do it here in the, sorry, I forgot the name of this area, it's a control panel. So if you just do type from the control panel, you do not get this preview, which is quite helpful for remembering what certain typefaces are. Now, I should probably move this over a little bit just to make sure you can see all of what's going on in here. So again, those are the options. Now usually if a type has more than one option, you will have to go further than just, like if I just click here, nothing really happens. I have to go over here and click on which version, whether I want the regular italic or bold. Alright, and then once you have the typeface chosen, if it's just simply a matter of changing it from italic to regular, that's what this next menu item is for. Then you have the size, which a lot of these menu options, there's more than one way to do this. You can use a click down here to change sizes instantly. You can also just click in here and type in the number you want, and you can also use this to go up or down. And yet another way is to just swipe the mouse across here, and then I can use the arrows on the keyboard to go up and down. And the nice thing about this, as opposed to clicking and dragging on one of the handles to change the size, is I know that it's not going to go bad. In other words, these are not going to change from anything other than 100% right here. Alright, then the next thing we have is the kerning, which is set to auto right now, but anytime text gets big, it is your job as a designer to fix that. So in this case, I can see that the distance between the P and the O is a little bit extreme. So I can just come over here, double click to turn the selection tool into the text cursor, and then go over here to the kerning. And my favorite way to do the kerning is just swipe across here so that I can look right at the text as I'm doing this, and I'm just hitting the down arrow until I get this set up right. And when you take a typography class, one of the things you'll learn in here is what to look for when you are kerning. But generally it's a visual adjustment where you want the space, not any point to point, but just the overall feel to be similar from one pair of letters to the next. You usually don't take the time to do it in small text, and the computer actually does a pretty good job of it, but once it gets big, you definitely have to. Our next option in here is tracking, which is very closely related to kerning, but you need more than just a pair. So in other words, you can't just be selected in between two, you need to have the whole thing selected, which that's one way to do it, or the other is just to click on all of it like this. And then the tracking, a positive number just changes, it's kind of like changing the kerning of every single pair in there, but you don't refer to it as that. It's just tracking. It changes the distance among characters within a selection that you make, and that can be an entire paragraph or every single bit of text that you can select on a single page. Generally you stick with 0 because it's designed to be perfect at 0, but if you're printing on cheap paper, for example, the ink can absorb out and make the letters look a little bit too close together, which might be a good reason to track out a little bit. Then the other option we have here is leading. Now leading is the distance from this line right here, which is known as a baseline, to the next one below it. So we actually need more than one bit of text to change that. So appropriately, we could go over here and grab all this text. So now, if I go in here and I change the amount of leading, it tells me what it's set at right now. And if I go in here and I change this, it'll change now from 25, whatever it was, to 40 points from this line to this line. A good starting point at small text sizes is to make sure that your type size, so let's say a small text size would probably be somewhere like, say, 9.5, for example. You would want this generally about 3 points higher, but that's not a hard, fast rule. It's just a good starting point. Most people use too little leading. They use the default, which gives you 20% leading, which just takes this number, multiplies it by 20%, and adds that into here. But usually considered by most designers not to be enough. Okay, and then the bottom options down here, this set of 4, we've already talked about these. This just lets you know that these both being at 100%, that the type has not been manipulated. And then a baseline shift is pretty much what it sounds like. If I wanted to bring just this letter X up or down, I would select it, and if I put a positive value in there, it will bring its baseline up. That would be handy if you're really trying to pinpoint a subscript, for example. But if you just need just a regular subscript, put that back at 0. You can get that from these options right here. So superscript would change that to a superscript, and subscript, a subscript. But if you really were picky about it, you could just go ahead, change the size of this X manually, and then play around with the baseline shift to get it exactly where you want it. Apple Command Z to go back to normal on that. And then this is a really strange option. I'm not sure where you'd ever find a use for this, but you can rotate an individual letter right within a block of text. So any letter that you select, you can then change this to rotate it and keep its orientation to the things that are around it, so to speak. You know, in other words, you go back in and change it back or change it to another angle. Probably not very useful. Then you have underline, which is probably not very useful any longer, since you know, the days of typewriters, they used to underline things. We now would italicize for that same effect. And then you have a strike through, which I don't maybe have a use for that. And then you just have a choice here of what the, in fact, I can't even select this right now. It probably depends on what typeface you're using, whether you can change the way the anti-aliasing works. And then you have a language selection, which right now is USA English, but if you were working in the UK, you could change that, and there's certain things that are different about type from even the English to the UK. All right, and then the last thing we have to talk about in here is just some of these other options that are available. So if you want it smaller, you go to hide options, show options, standard vertical Roman alignment, and then you can switch to all caps, small caps, but be careful here. Unless the font really has these, I wouldn't suggest that you do this, because they're what is known as faux all caps and faux small caps, which means the computer just tries to make them. A designer did not actually make them, and that can really stick out like a sore thumb. This just allows you to use fractional sizes, system layouts, no break. This can be handy when you want two words to stick together no matter what. Let me see if I can give you an example real quick here. Okay, so this is an example of what's known as a widow, when you have a small word at the end of a paragraph. So if that started happening to you, one way to get around that is to tie two words together, and all you have to do is just select the last bit of one word, continue it on into the last word, and then in the character palette you go up here and you, from these options, select no break, and now those words will stick together no matter what. No matter how you resize this, those two are always going to be together so that you can't end up with a widow. Oh, and the reason I wasn't able to get this to show before was just because I had a small amount of text selected. You generally need the whole entire area selected. So like that, now I can change this option. Most of the time you just use sharp, but sometimes when the text gets real small or real big, you may want to change. I don't know if we'll even be able to see much of a difference here. You can definitely see a difference without it. You get that stair step feature, so you always want some version of this on. So that sharp, crisp just tries to chisel it up a little bit, and strong, you know, you see a little bit of change there. You'd really have to get in close. So I'd suggest just stick with sharp unless you find a reason not to. Okay, and then the paragraph options. We'll look at one of the paragraphs that we brought in to work with that. So we'll switch from the character palette here. Let's get our text in view better. Okay. So put these back together, and we're going to work with the paragraph. But again, I'm going to tear this out so we can see some of the options here. So the first thing, this is probably going to be very similar to Word, is you have the paragraph alignment options. And probably the most common is what they call left justified ragged right, and that's what this little icon tells you, and that's how we're set up right. So we get a, that's how we're set up right now. So you get a straight edge on the left, and then it just aligns how it aligns on the right. This would be centered. Not useful for setting long amounts of text because it's been proven that it's harder to read because of the entry point. The same with the right gesture.